Good morning, everybody. Welcome to TGI Sports Talk with Keith Engel. We're live from East Greenbush, New York. Still, as Mark loves to hear me say, the only live streaming sports cast from East Greenbush. Beautiful day this morning, beautiful morning, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty good couple days here in the Northeast. Maybe some rain on Sunday. We can stay in and watch some football, whatever football there is. I want to thank my guests from last week. Ken Schott from the Daily Gazette. We had a great chat about pro football and some other topics. And I do thank Ken for coming on. And my guest today is Dick Weiss. Dick is a Hall of Fame sports writer. Worked for the Philadelphia Daily News, 40 years with the New York Daily News, covering the college sports scene, among a lot of other things. Contributor. I've heard him on the radio over the years on ESPN Radio, WFAN, lots of the outlets you probably have followed yourself. And we're going to talk today mostly about college football, college basketball. Dick's new books. He's got a ton of books out that he's written with guys like Dick Vitale and John Calipari and Rick Pitino. Wrote a book about Coach K. And he's got a new book with Dick Vitale out that we were just chatting about. So we'll bring Dick in. We'll get a little of his background, and we'll go from there. Good morning, Dick.
Hey, Keith. It's so nice talking to you.
It's great having you with me. I've read your stuff for years.
That only makes me sound old, Keith.
Well, I'm probably behind you, but I feel like I'm catching up quickly.
I think we all are.
Yeah. As I said, the Daily News is where I know you're from, but I used to read a lot of out-of-town newspapers. I used to love when I could find them and get them. So I've seen you in other places. I know I've heard you in a lot of outlets, as I said, on ESPN and The Fan. I believe you were on, I guess, a lot of times there. And now you've moved up to TGI Sports Talk. So this is kind of the pinnacle of your career, probably, I'm assuming.
Hey, I love it. I love it. It'll be nice talking to you.
Give us a little of your background, if you would, Dick, real quick before we jump into the college football scene here.
Well, I've spent most of my life as a newspaper man. My latest, I was at the New York Daily News from 1993 through 2015 as a national college football and basketball columnist. When it was good, before newspapers started going into a collapse mode, it was, in my mind, as good a job as you can have in the business, because they never said no, and they would send me just about everywhere. I think that Mort Zuckerman, the publisher, loved having datelines, and I probably spent a lot more of their money than I should have, but they were very, very good to me. And so during college football and college basketball, I would go to any big game that I wanted to see throughout the country. And I've also written 14 books, a number with Dick Vitale. I've written books with Rick Pitino, John Calipari. I've written books on, as you said, with a book on Mike Krzyzewski. I've written a book with Teresa Krentz, who was the 1992 women's Olympic coach. Just finished two books during this pandemic. One is called The Lost Season with Dick Vitale, which is about the NCAA tournament that didn't take place last year, and we do a simulated bracket at the end and actually pick a winner. And I've also done a book with a guy named Mike McDonald, who played on the Rutgers 75 team, which is the first team in school history to go to the NCAA basketball tournament. And he went on from there to become the president of the largest division at Xerox and has become a CEO at a huge weight loss company, Medifast, down in Baltimore. And here's a kid who grew up on the poor side of the tracks. His family did not own a house. They rented 6 different places when he was growing up, did not have a car till he was 15. And it's a great rags to riches story. And it's a good business motivational story on some of the techniques that he used to achieve where he's at. I just finished the manuscript for that this week. So it's kept me busy.
I followed that team pretty closely in my younger years. I remember that.
Yeah, I really liked that team. I mean, they had 4 future pros. They had Phil Sellers, Eddie Jordan, Mike Dabney, Hollis Copeland, who also all got some time in the NBA as players. And Rutgers, it wasn't like at school with a huge pedigree. They had not even been to a postseason tournament till 1967, back when Jimmy Valvano and Bob Lloyd was a first team All-American. Both were in the backcourt and had never gone to an NCAA tournament until 1975. It's a school that is a public Ivy, doesn't have a great athletic tradition unless you consider women's basketball, where Teresa Grentz and Vivian Stringer are both in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Well, we're going to jump in. I think towards the end we'll go back to college basketball because it's funny.
Sure. Whatever you want.
Kind of highly rated this year, so we'll touch on that a little bit. I want to start with the college football scene, I guess, and Alfred, we're off to a start, if even an uneven start, with the SEC and the ACC already with a few games under their belt, and still a few weeks before the Big Ten and Pac-12 start. Let me start with the obvious point, I guess, Dick. Do you think the universities, the NCAA, I guess, made the right decision in starting the season?
Well, everything's a gamble. Is it safe to play? There have been a number of teams who have had canceled games. There have been at least 3 head coaches, Mike Norvell, Les Miles, Kevin Sumlin, who have tested positive for COVID. Yeah. There have been a number of leagues, not a number of leagues, but 2 major leagues, the Pac-10 and the Big Ten, that haven't even started playing games yet. Right. It's funny when you look at the top 10 this week, Keith. I mean, there are actually 4 teams from the ACC in the Pac-10. Now, one of them is Notre Dame, which is playing a full ACC schedule this year, along with North Carolina and Clemson and Miami. But it's been a long time since there's been that many teams. Now, that's all going to change once the Big Ten starts to play. There have been a number of players who have opted out that would have been stars in the league. Micah Parsons from Penn State is a lock first-round linebacker, and he opted out of the season, as did a number of other players. I think if they were going to play, the best thing for them to do is probably play this fall, because had they postponed the season until the spring, it's hard to tell how many stars would have played. A lot of them may have just pulled out in order to prep for the combine and prep for the NFL draft, because they realize that the NFL is not going to move the draft from next spring. And so you might have lost a lot of people.
My guess would be none of them would have played in the spring. So
yeah, I think it might have looked a lot more like a JV sport, or a sport with a lot of freshmen and sophomore playing key roles.
So with that said, I mean, obviously we do have a season. Hopefully we can get through it.
Sure.
You mentioned the canceled games. I counted between 25 and 30 up to now, with 3 again this
Right.
week. You mentioned the coaches. I didn't know about Kevin Sumlin. That's a new one for me.
Yeah.
I heard about the Mad Hatter the other day. He may be happy he's out for a few weeks. I don't know. He's having a tough
Well, I
start.
was going to say, giving Kansas' track record the last couple of years, it's probably a much needed rest.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit. Let's talk about the season on a whole first before we dive into
Sure.
maybe some surprises and disappointments and specific situations. So with the playoff situation, well, first of all, I think the NCAA missed a perfect opportunity to maybe expand it myself.
Expand it, right. I totally agree with you.
Because it's going to be hard when we get to 4 teams, when you've got some teams that have played 11 or 12 games, and the Pac-10, or I'm sorry, Pac-12, when they start playing in November, 7 games, they have any kind of cancellations like we've had so far, and it's not reasonable to think there won't be some. They're not going to be able to make those games up. So now you've got the disparity in the games played. And I mean, how do you see that playing into the playoff selections?
Well, I'm one of these big people. I'm not a big analytics guy. I think this is going to be much more of a subjective selection than ever before. I mean, I just think the people on the committee are going to actually have to do their homework and watch games and try to determine the best 4 teams as opposed to the teams with the highest numerical rankings.
I think that's a good call there. Again, I wish they had, some, obviously the Major League Baseball, I don't know about the NBA, but everybody has expanded their playoff and changed their playoffs this season. I don't know that I want to see MLB keep, 16 teams in the playoffs, but this would have been a great season for them to experiment with 8 or even 16 teams, I think. So
yeah, I'm not sure about 16, but 8, I'm buying, because it really allows you to include all 5 teams in the Power 5 conferences and still make room for a group of 5 team like BYU and maybe 2 other at-large teams, because it appears that the SEC has at least 3 teams. If you include Georgia and Florida and maybe even Tennessee, that might be good enough to merit consideration aside from Alabama.
Yeah, I agree. So getting into the season a little bit or more specifically, what's been the things that have surprised you so far about the games played so far? Is there anything that really stands out to you?
Yeah, there's probably 2 things. I'm not surprised at the teams at the top, Keith. The fact that Alabama and Clemson are at the top of most polls, and that Ohio State is still ranked in the top 5, even though they haven't played a game. The things that have surprised me the most are the instability of the Pac-12. I mean, who would have guessed that Oklahoma would already have lost 2 games to Iowa State and Kansas State, and Texas would have needed overtime to beat Texas Tech and would have lost to TCU just last week. I mean, this was supposed to be the year Texas turned the corner. They have a legitimate quarterback in Sam Ehlinger. And now they are faced with a must-win situation when they play Oklahoma in the Red River Classic. And the game is obviously going to look a lot different than it did before because of the limited attendance at the Cotton Bowl in the middle of what used to be a very crowded state fair. I mean, you're going to see, they're going to let fans in, but it's not going to be the same. I mean, I just hope for these teams that are allowing their fan bases to attend the games that they do the wise thing and at least social distance. I mean, last week they had to throw the entire SMU student section out of the game. And frankly, the optics on the Georgia Auburn game in Georgia did not look good because there was no social distancing in the student section, and it was hard to miss because the game was a prime time.
I commented last week, I don't know if it was on my show Friday with Ken Schott or my Sunday show, that I was watching some games, as I'm sure you were, as you're mentioning. And
Sure.
yeah, there's people scattered around. You see a lot of people scattered around, but then you would find these huge clusters of people, like 200
Yes.
people, no masks.
Yep.
And I was shocked. And now we've come to the point, and I don't want to stay on COVID forever here, but I'll go back a little bit. You and I talked about yesterday, Ron DeSantis in Florida now has decreed that all the teams in the state, pro and professional, high school, I assume, if they're playing, can have full attendance at the games. And
that's just an invitation to a problem in a state that has had upwards to 10,000 people testing positive for COVID in a given day. I wish they hadn't done that. I really think this is not a political situation. This is a public health risk.
Oh, obviously.
Nobody wants to see anybody get sick, and even worse, no one wants to see anybody die. And the idea that we've had 210,000 people in this country die is a scary proposition. I mean, one death is way too many for me. And look, we all hope for a vaccine. We all hope that life gets back to normal. But, I just don't know why you would open the floodgates for something like that.
Yeah. And I've said from the beginning, as a huge sports fan, that sports is very important to the fabric of the country and
right.
giving people
Sure.
attraction. But you got to do it in a safe environment. I said that from the beginning, for the players, for the fans, their families.
Well, and it's ironic. You could, pro teams can do it if they play in a bubble. We've seen that with the NBA, but they also put $150 million into it.
Yeah.
Just to assure that all of their players would be safe, and with the exception of one or two players who decided to recklessly leave the bubble. Most of the players have been very good about this, but look, they're making huge money, but it's also a sacrifice being away from your family for an extended period of time. And it's expensive too. If you're a member of the media and you want first tier access to those games, it's probably going to cost your paper about $72,000 for 3 months. If you include the fact that it's $600 a night for a hotel room, and daily testing and food, and you can really only go 3 places. You can go to the practices, you can go to your hotel, or you can go to the games. And now you have access during that period of time to the coaches and the players. But for the most part, you're in a situation where you are locked into your room at any other time.
Yeah.
Or
it's a much more tenable situation for the NFL and college football, as spread out as they are. And
right.
But hopefully we'll stay safe. We'll stay smart. We want to watch the games. There are some big surprises this year. It's very funny to look at any of the top 25 rankings, and you got, 5, 6, 7 teams, and some of them that haven't even played a game yet. But some of the surprises, I'm a Miami fan. My stepson graduated from there.
Very good.
Before he moved on to North Carolina for his graduate studies, but he's still a Miami fan. So his mom and I still are, and they're playing great. They got a big game with Clemson this week, obviously.
They really do. I really think they finally have found a quarterback.
That kid is good.
I think Derek King, I watched him play at Houston live in a game where he put up over 500 yards total offense. And he's capable of big numbers. The thing that I like about him is he hasn't thrown an interception yet. Now, that may change this week. They have a huge game against Clemson, and this will tell us a lot more. And the last couple of years, Clemson has beaten them 92 by a combined score, 92-3. The games have not been But
I was going
I
to
will
mention that.
say this: I think this is certainly the best team that Miami's had in close to a decade. I really like they're capable of scoring points. I mean, so they will at least be able to keep up with Clemson on the scoreboard. I just don't know if they can outscore a team like Clemson, which looks like it's constantly in cruise control. I mean, they've got three legitimate stars in Trevor Lawrence and uh, Travis Etienne and Amari Rogers, who look like they can score anytime they touch the ball. And Lawrence is having a good year. He's thrown for 10 touchdowns, and they have not really been pressed at all in a league that I think is probably better in a lot of spots, not quite as good in some key spots. I think Florida State has been a disaster.
Oh my gosh.
I know it's a new coach. I'm not sure how much he inherited. They're down to the third quarterback already, Travis Jackson, and their games have not been. I mean, the game against Miami was not even close, and that's an early season game that has been traditionally competitive. I went to all of those great Miami, Florida State games when uh, Bowden and Jimmy Johnson and Erickson were coaching down there in the late 80s and early 90s, and every game came down to last second place.
I've talked a lot about with some of the other guests I've had about certain sports, and the sports are better when certain teams are good. And obviously, college football's got their
Yes.
perennial contenders, right? But I think college football's a lot better when Miami and Florida State are good.
Well, I mean, anytime you have teams with great rivalries
Yeah.
and years of tradition, it's funny. Miami never really. It's been almost 40 years since 1980 when Howard Snellenberger started turning it around for good. But you know, they were kind of they and Florida State were kind of Johnny come latelys. But Florida produces on the average about 250 Division One prospects. They do as well as anyone in the country, including Texas and California, in terms of players who can make an impact on the field. The foot speed at the grassroots level is enormous, and you see teams in the SEC constantly going into Florida to recruit athletes.
Yeah, when Florida can keep them at home, that's when they're good, right? When the Florida
Well,
team.
I mean, you don't need to keep a lot. If you get 25 a year, I mean, or 20 a year, you're probably going to lock yourself into a top 10, top 15 team. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, it helps to have uh, a franchise player for you, but I mean, the level of play in grassroots is pretty impressive.
Yeah. Florida State being down, it's a shame because we lose out on what could have been a really good matchup Saturday night with Notre
Absolutely.
Dame and Florida State.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Probably not
Notre
the
Dame. I mean, I think Notre Dame has a good team. I think that they have a very good offensive line. They've got a legitimate quarterback in Book. They've got decent running backs. But last week they had 25 people who were quarantined.
Yeah.
I mean, and they lead the country in COVID positive testing, and that is a scary thing. So you never know who you're going to have on the field. They had to cancel their one game against Wake Forest earlier this season after they really started getting it going. I mean, they were so I thought in the first half against Duke in the opener, but I think they have a lot of talent. I'm not sure how competitive that game will be. I worry about. I don't know that you can take a third string quarterback into that game, and everybody's last name isn't Flutie. I mean, you're in a situation where you're playing against pretty good football players, and
Yeah.
I just don't know this is going to be a year they write home about at Florida State.
I think the only chance Florida State has got in my mind is if Notre Dame is affected by this 2 week layoff and maybe
Yeah,
lack of, being able to prepare like they
yeah,
normally.
yes, yeah. Look, that's the way it is. I mean, who would have guessed Oklahoma would go through what they're going through? I
Yeah,
mean, I mean, it's different. I mean, and every time you lose a game, it seems to be magnified because you're playing so few non-league games or bye games where you can build up momentum.
yeah.
Yes,
Bless you.
thank you. I can use all the help I can get. It's just a cold. Trust me.
I think it's funny. That's where we live now. We go, oh, hope he's okay.
Now live.
For those of you who might be just joining us, my guest today is Dick Weiss, Hall of Fame sports writer. He's covered college sports for longer than he probably cares to tell.
Way too long. I've been to 47 Final Fours.
Wow, that's awesome.
I
What
started
national
going
champion?
right out of college,
Yeah,
and I've been to 38, 38 national championship games. So I've been very, very fortunate. Now, sadly, I'm not sure how this year will work out. I mean, I was in New York last spring for the Big East tournament when they canceled during the second day, and
yeah,
we are leaving the building right after they canceled at halftime, and they're literally pushing us out the door because word had already spread that uh, two ushers had come down with it. And this is back in the day when New York was announcing 28 cases, and I think there were a lot more. And so 1 o'clock, I go back, and my wife is at the Met, and I wait for her to get home, and we just back up and leave. And that is the last time I have been close to a live sporting event. It's a shame because I love the feeling of being at a big game,
especially
particularly in
college.
college. But yeah, right. The passion and the build up before a huge college game, particularly in football, because it's so important in the deep South, really jumps up and grabs you every Saturday. I don't know the next time I'm going to see a game. Maybe I don't know if I'll go to the finals in Miami this year or not. I mean, I don't know how they're even going to deal with the media down there, because or if that many media are going to go. I mean, we've seen a total change, Keith, in the way games are covered.
Yeah,
I think we're seeing a lot less people go to college games, particularly on the road, largely because newspapers and websites have discovered that money money that's not spent is money that they can save for other things, particularly professional sports. I think that right now the worst thing to happen to college football writers is the fact that newspapers have discovered that you can actually watch the game from your couch, and now they have Zoom press conferences
mhm,
afterwards. And even if you go to the games, you're not getting individual one-on-ones with any of the players.
yeah,
So newspapers are saying, do we want to pay for airfare? Do we want to pay for a car rental? Do we want to pay for a hotel room? Do we want to pay for food? So you can go to a game that will really only be attended by at the most 15,000 people when you can watch the game at home, uh, get the same material that you might get if you were live, because you're not going to get any of the players out in the field, and you're not going to get any players in the visiting locker room, and so you are basically going to, and you are basically have uh, a situation where you have 6 foot distancing, and So you tune in your computer, you listen to the post game press conference, and that's what you get. And you're not going to get to know any of the players this year.
And you can do it all from your couch, as like you said, virtually.
You can, and I think it's going to change the way people at least cover that sport.
Yeah. Well, circling back to the games a little bit this weekend,
Sure.
there's a couple of good big matchups. Obviously, Alabama and Mississippi, while it may not be the marquee game, we got one of the most interesting coaching matchups this week with Lane Kiffin coming back to play his head coach.
Kiffin was actually Nick Saban's assistant coach for 3 years when they won 3 SEC championships, and they won a national championship in 2015. The next year, right before the championship game against Clemson, Nick fires him and replaces him with Steve Sarkisian, who is another former Southern Cal assistant coach.
With an interesting background.
Yeah, and Lane ends up going off into purgatory for a couple of years down at one of the smaller schools in Florida. And now he is back at Ole Miss, and it hasn't taken him long to take on Saban. He tweaked him a little bit this week. He suggested that if both of those players were on the field, there's no way that Saban could cover him. And he's probably right. But then he referred to him as an elderly man. Saban is 68, but I don't know that he'd want to be listed as elderly. I mean, he is as active as they come. And I have a feeling there's no real love lost. But, Saban is 20-0 against former assistant coaches who have gone on to become head coaches in college. And Kiffin is just another one on the list.
I have a sense he might keep the foot on the gas pedal if he gets ahead in this game.
Yeah, well, the only thing that Ole Miss really has going for them is their ability to score. Yeah. So I have a feeling that, while Kiffin can try, they both can try to control the tempo of the game, but I think that right now, Ole Miss is still a one-dimensional team. If you looked at last week's game against Kentucky, it was 42-41 in overtime. And I think that's the game they're going to try to play. Unfortunately, I don't know that you can do that against an Alabama team that looks like it's capable of getting 50 in any given game this year. I mean, what they just throttled A&M last week. And, a lot of people thought, they lost Tua, they lost Judy, they lost Ruggs, so they lost the bulk of their wide receivers. They actually might be as good or better in those positions this year. I mean, Jalen Waddle and the kid Minky and the quarterback Mac Jones look like they can throw it. They look like you can put a ton of points on the board. I mean, it's a lot different Alabama team than you saw like when they had Mark Ingram and they won in 2009 and they were basically just setting up in an I formation and running behind a NFL offensive line and beating teams down. This team is playing a lot more like Sarkisian's USC teams back when he was the offensive coordinator there. And it's wide open football, and they're a lot harder to defend this year than they ever were.
Yeah, you mentioned Mac Jones, and he was a big question mark coming into the season in a lot of corners.
Yes,
quieted the doubters for sure.
And it didn't take long. I mean, last week he had 435 and threw for 4 touchdowns. And, he's played his way into at least some Heisman watches. I mean, obviously that league has got their share of great quarterbacks, and Kyle Trask is off to a great start down in Florida. But this kid is going to be could very easily finish in the top 5 in the Heisman.
Yeah, I see De'Aaron King there too myself, but
yeah, you like that, don't you?
I do.
The amazing thing about King too is he's 5'10".
Yeah,
it's not like he's the prototypical pro guy. Although Russell Wilson's done fairly well in the league, and he's not the biggest guy in the world.
What about the? I mean, you mentioned Texas A&M, Texas A&M a minute ago. They got a big game, I guess, against Florida State, or Florida this week. Excuse me. And it seems like they're another team that they're ready to turn a corner, and they just don't ever get around that corner. It's a big
And the irony is, I mean, they went out of their way to hire Jimbo Fisher.
yeah.
They paid him a truckload of money. I mean, his total package over multiple years has to be close to $85 million. And he gave up 52 last week to Alabama. Um, they're at a point now where that league is so good that a lot of people who are decent coaches fail because they just don't have the same level of talent. Now, there's no reason why A&M should not be able to get players. I mean, they have unlimited budget down in College Station. I mean, there are some people who think their budget is the equal of Texas's budget, and I don't know that Texas has a budget. I just think they spend, but the last 5 or 6 years, the Sumlin era was not great. And Jimbo looks like he's still in the middle of rebuilding. It's never a good year to rebuild in that league because there are too many good teams. And Florida looks like they can put a lot of points on the board. I mean, they're the only team with a tight end, Kyle Pitts, that probably is a legitimate Heisman candidate. I mean, who would have guessed a tight end would fall in that category? But his first game, he has 4 touchdowns. The next game, he scores 2 more. He and Trask could become a lethal combination.
Yeah. Well, I hope that they will stay fairly healthy through here, get through the season.
So do I.
Give me I'll put you on the spot and give me your final 4.
Oh, I think it'll probably be most of your favorite teams. I think there's a legitimate shot for the SEC to get 2 teams in if everything falls in the right way. I think you'll have Clemson. I think Alabama. I think Ohio State could be very good. And I think right now, I still like Georgia ahead of Florida because I think they're a little bit more advanced defensively. I think the Auburn game last week was a big tell when they took a 24-3 lead and won 27-6. That was pretty impressive to me. And I guess we'll know a lot about them this week. They have Tennessee this week, and both teams like to run the football. Both teams have legitimate running backs. Both teams have legitimate offensive lines. But if they win that game, I mean, it's really a 3-way race for the East. But if they win the East, this might and finish unbeaten in their section, it might be a year where they get in. I'm sure Notre Dame would love to make a case for themselves. I don't know, given the fact they're playing in the ACC, whether the selection committee would take 2 ACC teams.
Yeah, it's that Tennessee game, Tennessee Georgia game this weekend is obviously a very interesting game. So obviously we're looking at chalk basically for the
well, I mean, it's usually been chalk. I mean, this is not the NCAA basketball tournament where you can turn around and see Butler and VCU in a Final Four, or or see Auburn and Texas Tech in a Final Four. I mean, it's a lot more wide open in college basketball because of the amount of one and dones than it is in college football, where most kids have to stay 3 years, and if they play as freshmen, they're probably good enough to be stars.
If you had to pick an outlier, somebody who might crash the party, You can imagine who I like to crash the party, I guess.
Yeah,
But
you like Miami. I'm not sure that they have enough to beat Clemson this week.
Weiss, maybe, right?
I mean, the game's at Clemson, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes it all the tougher for them to go on the road. But I'm trying to think of a team that might surprise people. I just don't think there's a better team than Ohio State in the Big Ten. And I'm not sure whether the Pac-12 is going to get the same type of street cred as teams who have played um, for an extended period of time and are well known to the fans by before the end of October,
Yeah.
the start of November. I mean, there are a lot of people who like Oregon. I'm not sure if I like them enough to place them ahead of the teams in the top 10 now. I mean, um, I just, maybe Tennessee. Maybe Tennessee if they were to win this week. I mean, look, they put 232 yards rushing on Missouri last week. Now I know it's Missouri, but they look like a dominant rushing team there. And the other team that I think is interesting but may not have enough quality points is BYU.
I was
I
going to ask
mean,
about the gang.
their quarterback has completed Zach Wilson 85% of his passes in 3 games. They have had over 500 yards total offense in 3 games. They have scored 40 or more points in every game. Their biggest problem is they don't play a ranked team on the schedule.
That was my next question. Do they play enough good teams?
They don't play that. There is not a ranked team on their schedule.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that. I mean, I think they have a legitimate shot to finish the season unbeaten. They have Boise State this year in May, but they go unbeaten. It wouldn't surprise me, but I'm not sure that people won't look at their schedule and say doesn't work for me. You actually have a better shot of playing in the game, I think, if you play in a league like the American, which traditionally has got 3 or 4 teams that are pretty competitive in any given year, even if Central Florida has already lost a game, than you do if you play an independent schedule. I was always surprised that they chose to go independent, especially with problems scheduling games after September. I mean, right now, a lot of the major conferences are in a situation where they are moving up the number of league games that they play, which means there is less chance of you getting an opportunity to play any of their teams after the middle of September.
Well, that's what forced Notre Dame to play a full ACC schedule, right? I mean,
Yeah, they could have been in big trouble
yeah,
because, I mean, if they didn't join that league right now.
yeah.
Because I mean, at the time, you had a lot of teams that weren't even sure they were going to play. And one thing Notre Dame, it's a business in Notre Dame, despite what they might tell you. I mean, football is an important part of the college tradition there, and they want their games. Now they have limited attendance to their student body and faculty this year. I mean, I know that Dick Vitale, who's a close friend of mine, called up and he gives a lot of money to the school, and he's a huge Notre Dame fan. And he could not get tickets to the games. They are restricting it. I mean, they're almost trying to create their own bubble. I mean, give or take a president that shows up at the Rose Garden without a mask and ends up with COVID. They are trying to keep the attendance restricted to students and faculty on their campus.
Well, it's going to be an interesting season. I hope we can make it to the end, get to the
So
playoff
do I. So do I.
relatively healthy, and everybody stays healthy. Let's. So again, my guest for anybody who's just joining, and I'll say hi to David and Kyle and Bob. Bob Engel, my dad, is here again today. Hello, Bob, and
Very nice.
my stepmom Jeanette. They're always here supporting me on Friday mornings. I think
Group support. Group support.
very good. We'll switch gears a little bit. Or my host is I didn't say what I was going to say when I cut in there. My guest is Dick Weiss, Hall of Fame sports writer. We just got through talking a little bit about college football, and I want to switch gears in our last little bit of time here, Dick, and talk a little bit about the college basketball season, which is amazingly right around the corner. What do you see there? I mean, is there any? I mean, we've got.
This may be the year Gonzaga wins the national championship.
Yeah.
I really like their personnel. They lost their big kid from last year, but they have so many bodies, and he has done such a good job of resourceful recruiting in Europe that and he's now starting to attract players like Jalen Suggs, who was a top 10 recruit out of Minneapolis and is going to go to school there. When you reach that point, it doesn't matter what league you play in. You are judged on your success. And Mark Few has never been afraid to schedule anyone anywhere. I mean, I give him a lot of credit. I think this may be the year that they win the whole thing. I mean, there are a number of teams out there like Baylor and Villanova that will make a push. Baylor got lucky; they got both of their guards, McTigg and Butler, to come back after they both applied for the NBA draft. I mean, I think we're lucky in the fact that a number of people have decided that there's only 60 slots in a draft, and 144 people originally applied for the draft. I don't know that just when you do the math, somebody's not going to end up being selected. I don't care how many agents tell you late first round. Everybody can't be late first round.
Right.
And we're very lucky that a number of those players have come back. And even though I feel like we are looking at new stars almost every year now because the first round selections are almost all freshmen. I mean, I would bet this year that you probably will have 9 of the 10 guys go in the first round will be freshmen. And in 22 or 23, when they open the door for high school kids to come out, you're going to start seeing a lot more players who would be stars in college leaving, but it also might allow players to stay for more than 1 year too.
What about I've got a couple of I'll ask you about a couple of quick teams because I'm going to ask you about some outside possibilities there because there always is in the NCAA, as you mentioned, some people that come out of nowhere. And there's a couple of teams that intrigue me. Rutgers is one of them. We talked about them.
I'm a huge Steve Michael guy. I loved him when he was at Stony Brook. I loved him when he was at Rutgers. I think that when he was looking at this job, he got so much negative reinforcement. Most people said, why do you want to go there? They've just gone through 6 coaches. They've changed 3 leagues. It's an impossible situation. The guy who convinced him to take a shot at this job was Jim Calhoun. He says he thought it was a sleeping giant. They won 11 games at home last year. They hadn't been to the NCAA tournament since 1991. I think they would have had their name called last year. I don't know how high that would have been, maybe 7 or 8 as a seed, probably, but they won games last year without anyone on their roster averaging over 13 points a game. But he did play 8 or 9 people. They play relentless defense. They rebound the ball extremely well off the defensive glass. They have two guys who I think could emerge as stars this year. Geo Baker, who's a point guard from New Hampshire, who was really kind of overlooked by a lot of people, has become a legitimate Big Ten point guard, and Ron Harper Jr.,
Hmm.
who is on a number of all conference first, second, or third teams. And they have size. They signed a 6'11" kid from Roselle Catholic. It's the first time they've gotten a top 50 player in a while. They have Miles Johnson back at the center spot. I mean, and even though they lost a kid McConnell who was going to medical redshirt this year, they have 7 or 8 players in their rotation who got meaningful minutes last year, and I think they could be very good again. I mean, they've gotten the students back involved, Keith, which I think is really important. I mean, the RAC can be a very difficult place to play if you get student involvement. And I was at a couple of their games. I saw them beat Maryland toward the end of the year. I saw them beat Minnesota on a Sunday. And they shut down key players on both teams and really did a good job shutting down the 3-point shot when they played Maryland. Did a very good job taking the point guard Carr out of the equation when they played Minnesota. So they really play hard defensively. It's become a calling card for them, and obviously it's a team that still has to learn how to win on the road, but they had one game that they had to win to lock up what I thought was a bid last year. It happened at the end of the season. They won at Purdue, which is a pretty good win for them on the road.
Player.
And so they had some momentum going into the Big Ten tournament out in Indianapolis.
What about a couple of historically prominent teams that have fallen on harder times and maybe on the way back? Indiana, UCLA. Do you have any thoughts on those
I
teams?
think UCLA was much better toward the end of the year than they were at the start of the year. I didn't know if they'd get out of the funk after the start of the year, but they got a huge break when Chris Smith came back. I mean, they always are going to get good players, and you know they're always going to lose players who always end up making NBA rosters.
Yeah.
But I think Mick Cronin has been willing to change his philosophy. I mean, when he was at Cincinnati, he liked to micromanage. He liked to play games in the 50s. He's let his kids go a little bit more this year, and it's really paid dividends. I think the Pac-10 is an up-tempo league, and if you're unwilling to play that, it makes it a lot harder to recruit players. Although I'll say this, there's so many good players in the SoCal region, particularly in LA and Orange County, that if you can get your share, you should be competitive. Now, is UCLA good enough to win the league this year? I think that they're still going to have to show me they can win on the road. I like USC's front court with the Mobleys. I like Oregon just because I think that they found ways to get it done with whatever personnel that they have under Dana Altman. But I think UCLA is going to make a shift to where they can be a contender on a lot more consistent basis. Now, well, your other team was,
Indiana.
this is it. This is Archie Miller's 7th year. They're at a point where they have to get to they have to establish a pattern of getting to the NCAA tournament. I mean, they were really on the edge last year. You remember Archie had that big blow up with Joe Lenardi over uh, the way that the team was evaluated. They've got a very good young freshman, Linder, who's a guard, but they've lost a lot of key players. One who transferred, another who left early for the pros. I don't know that getting the best players in Indiana anymore is enough, particularly the southern part of the state. I mean, and a lot of kids from the northern part of the state are going to other schools. They're either going to Michigan State, they're going to Purdue, I mean, they're going to Illinois. It's not like they're totally locked into going to Indiana the way that they were. And I'm not sure if the state itself is producing the amount of players that it used to. You don't see Kentucky in their recruiting. They haven't been there since Tig, and that was like 2012.
Yeah. Well, we only got a few minutes left here, Dick, but I have to touch on one more subject, which is it's more of a local subject, but it involves a national figure who actually had some ties to a team up nearby me, and it's in the MAC, and a coach that you collaborated with in the past, Rick Pitino.
I think they're going to win 23 games.
23 games at Iona, yeah, can make the tournament.
I'll say that I think though, yeah, I think that I think Timmy Klus did a great job building a foundation, and probably had he not been sick, could have continued that streak for an indefinite period of time. The league itself is so it's not as stable as you would like, or that it used to be used to. Iona's the one team that's done it. I mean, Rick went in and recruited 6 pretty good players, and none of them visited campus because of COVID.
Right.
And he still got them to come. He's got great connections in New York. I think they could wind up being the Gonzaga of the East before it's over. If you take a look at their roster, I mean, they are signing players from all over the world, and they've been able to reach in. They got a kid from Christ the King this year who's pretty good. They've been able to reach into the New York Catholic League and get their share of kids. And I think that when you can coach, you can coach.
Yeah.
I will say this. Had Rick Pitino stayed at Kentucky and he never taken the Boston Celtics job, he would have been Mike Krzyzewski. He would have won 5 national championships. He would have been the Olympic coach. His life would have been changed. But he was also offered $50 million to go to Boston.
Hard to say no.
That's hard to say no. But, it didn't work out there. Frankly, he won a championship at Louisville. I know that they say they took it away, but he won a championship at Louisville. He's been to the Final Four there, but I don't think his success at Louisville was ever the same as it was at Kentucky, where he was a legitimate threat to win a championship in 93, 96, 97, and 92. And in a brief period of time, he got that thing up and running to a point where they were a monster team every year. I mean, they were, and kids wanted to play. He was almost at a point like Krzyzewski where he could select rather than recruit in the Mid-South, Deep South.
Well, I'm not confident that there's going to be fans allowed in the TU Center when they come up here to play Siena, but I hope there is, because I'd love to see that team play.
Yeah. How are things going at Siena? Are they starting to?
They had a decent year last year, and they've got a lot of kids back, and I think
I know they had gone through their share of coaches. I was
up and
very
down.
close. Yeah, I was very close to Paul Hewitt when he had to go a little bit.
Great coach, yeah.
There, I mean, there's a guy, and look, he did get to a Final Four at Georgia Tech. Didn't quite work out for him at Mason, but really a class act. I mean, just a good guy.
Fran McCafferty had some good success there, too.
I've known Franny since he's been in 9th grade. It's funny, when he was a senior in high school, his dad called me and wanted my advice. about where he should go to school. And I told him at the time he should go play for Pete Carrill at Princeton, showing what I know. He ends up going out the next night, getting 50 in a high school game, playing in the McDonald's All-American team, signing at Wake Forest, transferring to Penn, getting into coaching. And I think that he has a team at Iowa this year that probably will be a contender along with Wisconsin to win the Big Ten championship. He's
Yeah,
got the best player in college basketball, in Luka Garza, and both of his kids are playing now too, which is
yeah.
nice.
He's an underrated coach. I like him too. He's got a great personality. And
Yeah, we've been friends for a long, long time.
call him up. Tell him I want him on the show.
All right.
Well, Dick, I'm going to wrap it up here. Listen, there's so much more we could cover. And once we get into the heart of basketball, college basketball season, I'd love to have you back on, I think, to talk some more about that specifically. If you
No problem.
What's the name of the new book again?
It's called From the Bench to the Boardroom. And again, it's a story about a player from the Rutgers glory years who ended up going on to have enormous success in professional business. It's a feel good story.
Well, I encourage everybody to get out there and look for it when it's available. I know I will be. I want to thank Dick Weiss again for joining us today. Dick, if you want to wait a second, we'll wrap up quick
No problem.
We'll chat for a second.
Sure.
I thank you for your time with us today.
Hey, it was very, very nice talking to you.
Thanks, Dick. Don't send your voucher to the accountant until at least Thanks, Dick. All right, I want to thank Dick Weiss for coming on with us today. Great guy. Again, very knowledgeable, as you can tell, about the college world in football and basketball. We'll probably have Dick on again during the basketball season. It's where I grew up. I shouldn't say grew up, but I've read and followed Dick through the years as his coverage of college basketball, which is exceptional. So I want to thank all of you. Can't see you all in the room as always, but I'll see you afterwards. And any comments you've made, I'll certainly comment on. I want to let you know that I'll be joining the Mac and Jack show here at 9:15. We'll talk a little bit about the Patriots and maybe some other topics. Not sure. But if you want to look up on Facebook, you'll find me on that show this morning. And next week, we will have Harvey Arrington with us. So we look forward to that as well. And I'll be on Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern time. We'll talk about the college football wrap-up, a little NFL, probably some MLB playoffs, Yankees with a huge Game 5 tonight. And we wish them well. I think you'll see Garrett Cole again on short rest for the first time in his career. So I want to thank everybody for coming in today. Like the show, or like the page, like the show, share the show, and I appreciate all of your support. We'll see you next week.